in using the powers of the forces that they are part of, earth, air, fire, and water, elemental magic, joining together to bring about the kingdom of the Antichrist in the last days. There was a movie with Bruce Willis called The Fifth Element. And in this movie, it was about the gathering of 4 mystical stones combined with an alien force in the form of a red-haired woman to save humanity. The movie poster for this movie says, "There is no future without the fifth element." Now, let's take all this information that we've put together and let's look at what it really is referring to. Here is a picture of what is called an X chromosome. Now, remember from all of our other videos, we teach that the X chromosome is where your DNA is stored. Your DNA is like this ladder that God, it's a book that God wrote inside of all your cells. And this DNA ladder, the 2 rungs of this ladder are joined together by 4 elements: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. And notice in this graphic, they are opposites of one another, similar to the 4 elements that are referred to in elemental magic. The idea of the pentagram representing the 4 elements, which represents man, Manly Hall said that, they represent the 4 base pairs that you and I have of our DNA, our very essence of who we are. In Daniel chapter 2, remember, whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they, the spirit or the ether, the 5th element, shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, as even as iron is not mixed with miry clay. And so you understand this, that the pentagram represents the ether or the spirit realm added to the 4 base pairs of mankind's DNA. Literally, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. We saw earlier in Eliphas Levi's book the tetragrammaton associated with the pentagram. The tetragrammaton is the 4 letters of God's name in Hebrew, Yod, He, Vah, He. And so the image is the Yod, He, Vah, He would represent the 4 base pairs of mankind's DNA. Again, with that 5th thing, here is a graphic of it. You see the letters Yod, He, Vah, He. In this image of it sort of looks like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, and then on top of it you have the Hebrew letter Shin, which represents 3-strand DNA or another strand of DNA added to mankind's DNA. Another version or another way of looking at the pentagram is seen in the image of the skull and bones. The 4 bones represent, and the 4 bones even look like an X chromosome. They represent the 4 base pairs of mankind's DNA. The skull is an image of the Antichrist. He is a picture of the beast in the last days. Remember, Christ was crucified where? At the place of the skull. In Freemasonry, they have what's called a reflection chamber. And inside a reflection chamber is contained an image of the 4 elements and the image of the skull and crossbones, which is a form of the pentagram, which basically means the spirit realm added to man's DNA. You remember this symbol, the symbol for singular wireless? It is a dead ringer for the skull and bones, which we now know is associated with the pentagram or the transformation of mankind. You see that image of the pentagram or the skull and bones in various ways on different products. In Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code, the pentagram was used as a symbol for what was referred to as the sacred feminine, or basically the goddess. It was supposed to be an illustration of what is called the Venus transit. Now here's an interesting thing, and this is true. And remember, God designed all the planets and all the stars and everything like that. The planet Venus, which is commonly referred to as the morning star, the planet Venus, over an 8-year period, draws in the night sky and in the morning sky the image of a 5-pointed star. During that 8-year time, drawing that 5-pointed star, it revolves around the sun exactly 13 times. Now here's the interesting part, is that all of these numbers and all of these elements, number one, I believe correctly point to Christ. He is the morning star rising up in the morning, the number 5 being His number for grace and His sacrifice and the Prince of Peace, and the number 13 being basically you have 12 disciples and Jesus being number 13. Jesus represents the very love of God given to us. Now when we look at the exact opposite of that, we see this 5-pointed pentagram being a symbol of the power of Satan and the kingdom of Satan in the last days, And the number 13 specifically pointing to Mystery Babylon the Great, the sacred feminine, whose 13-word title adorns her forehead in Revelation chapter 17. This pentagram is highly associated with the sacred feminine religion called Wicca. Wicca claims to use the elements of nature or the forces of nature, giving them elemental magic. Elemental magic is all about the transformation of men into gods. One of the things that I'm starting to see is this word or this phrase element or elements or elemental being used in a lot of weird places. We are seeing a lot of churches referring to themselves as Element Church. Here's another one called Element Church. Here's one called Element Christian Church that actually boasts that it uses the symbols of the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. I think we're seeing elemental magic creeping in to the house of God. One book company even promotes Elements Kids Worship. Now, I'm going to show you a graphic of a comic book. I used to collect comic books when I was a kid. I'm going to show you a graphic, and I've used this before. But here's a comic book, DC Comic Books, called Night Force. I want you to notice that there is a woman down laying on this pentagram. So already we've seen this number 5 in the pentagram associated with the transformation of man. We see that in elemental magic. We see that in all these things. Now we're going to look at, we've seen it in the kingdom of Satan. We're going to look at now the idea of the bride and the bridegroom. Because the pentagram in the satanic worship realm and in the witchcraft realm represents this. Here's what Kathy Burns said in her book. The Great Rite Invocation specially declares that the body of the woman taking part is an altar, with her womb and generative organs as its sacred focus, and reveres it as such. The high priestess then lays herself down towards the altar, and her arms and legs outstretched to form the pentagram. According to former Satanist and Mason Bill Schnabelin, the pentagram has one use only, and that is to call up the power of Satan and bring the kingdom of the devil into manifestation on the earth. So I want you to remember this theme associated with the number 5 in the Bible of the bride and the bridegroom. Now we have the exact opposite of that. We have the devil, the father of all lies. We have the earth, the mother of all abominations on the earth. And there is a ritual called the Great Rite Ritual that performs basically a fornication act, and it's a mockery of the union of Christ in His church in the last days. And here this woman lays herself down in the form of a pentagram. Now I want you to think of a building called the Pentagon. Here we have the image of the Pentagon. It is 5 stories tall. It has 5 layers to it. It has 5 sides. It is the very center of warfare in the entire world. Remember, the 5th title that Jesus was given was called the Prince of Peace. In this case, the Pentagon, the pentagram, represents the king of warfare, or the king of nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom in the last days. If you remember, here's this clip of President Dwight Eisenhower just before he left office, warning about the power that the Pentagon had.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
He calls it the military-industrial complex and warns that it has and is gaining too much power on planet Earth. I agree with him because of the symbolism that's associated with it. One of our watchers sent me this, didn't even know I was working on this, sent me this graphic. Lockheed Martin is a Pentagon contractor. They build all the